I said, hey, I just got offered a job. And my wife, being the sensible one, she says, well, how much does it pay? And I said, well, I don't know. And I said, but I really think I want to take it.
I really think I'm super excited about it.
How much does it pay? Keep in mind, we're about ready to have our first child and build our first house.
Yeah.
And I went upstairs and took a job that I didn't know how much it paid.
So Mike Murphy, President and CEO of the Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce. We welcome you to the table today.
Well, thank you very much. I wonder who used to say that same title before me.
Yes.
And
we do have a story to tell.
Your predecessor, What kind of condition did he leave the chamber in?
hey, I thought we said that was off ground.
Oh, that's
off limits today.
Brett, I tell people this. I was so blessed to walk into that situation. Yeah. First of all, I was on the board for 6 years. I was on the board for 2013 to 2019.
Okay, so you knew that.
I knew somewhat what I was getting into. I didn't know as far as the job, but I knew the organization.
Sure, gotcha.
But I say over and over again, I've done a lot of things in my life, and I can honestly tell you, I've never had as good a staff as what I have at the chamber.
And that's what Chris said.
I don't worry about anybody else. It's one thing to manage people and you go there and you have to worry if they're doing their job. All I have to do is worry about myself.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, they take care of their jobs. They understand it. Now, we talk. I just came from our staff meeting, our Monday morning staff meeting at 10 o'clock. And, we go over everybody. So I know what they're doing, but I don't have to micromanage anybody.
Well, Chris said Lisa's a rock star.
Yeah, well, she's been there 28 years. David's been there 19 years now or something like that.
Yeah. Wow. No, they're awesome.
Yeah, I try to stay out of their way as much as possible.
That's awesome. I did. I mean, right? If you just stay out of their way, they make you look good.
Yeah,
so, at least they did me, and that's hard to make me look good.
So. Brad, the number of times that we're in a meeting, and I will spitball. I just threw out 3 or 4 ideas before in today's meeting that they, I see if they roll their eyes or not. Yeah. But the number of times that I've just said something casually. Yeah. It'd be cool if we could do something like that. And the next thing I know, Lisa or David has a position paper. 5 to 7 things that we got to do to get it done.
Well, that's awesome.
I mean, so I can sit back and give them some ideas. And, like any position, I came in and made some changes, not because they needed to be made. Right. It's because it's something I wanted to do.
Sure.
The organization's strong, has been strong, but you got to grow.
Oh yeah. And we have been members of the chamber for as long as I can remember, 30 years, right? Decatur, obviously at first, and now in Springfield. But I didn't really realize how valuable the chamber is to small business until we went through COVID. And to me, getting those weekly emails or the communication. One day he called me and said, hey, you really got to look at this program.
Sure.
I would have totally missed it. And it was a significant amount of money for our company at a time when things weren't real good.
No, Chris knows this. He used me in a video one year, and we just, similar to what we're doing today, just sit down and talk about what. And the one phrase that I used that resonated with Chris, it was, the chamber makes you bigger.
Yep.
And when you're a smaller business, I had Charlie Parker's Diner. Sure. And I don't know if you know this, I worked for some major restaurant corporations.
I did not know that.
I worked for Domino's Pizza Corporation. I had 64 stores in my area. I had Central Illinois, Central Northern Indiana. My office was in Chicago. I lived in Springfield, but my office was in Chicago. But our main office was in Ann Arbor.
Okay.
And I would go to Ann Arbor, and we would have a whole floor of HR.
Sure. Wow.
We had a whole kitchen of research and development. We had our own lobbyist for Illinois even.
Sure. Wow. Yeah.
And you know what we had at Charlie Parker's? We had me.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And so the chamber made me larger. They provided opportunities, like you just said. Yeah. Let me know about programs that's going on. Advocated for me.
Absolutely.
How I didn't have time to go do that. And I've said all along the 2 most important organizations for Charlie Parker's was the Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce and the National Restaurant Association.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Makes sense.
Both those organizations made me a bigger organization.
Yeah, that's great.
I'll pay you afterwards for that. Thank you. No, you're right. Mike always was one of those folks who got it.
Yeah,
I really understood that.
And it's not about it's a challenge. We talk about expressing what the chamber does. It's hard. It's hard to. It's not a tangible item. We can't give you this.
Yeah, there's no goods and services.
Yeah.
Right. Yes,
but and a lot of people think it's just about the networking opportunities and the events, and those things are great. I used to go to as many chamber events as I could, and I would always tell my wife. After I went to one, a customer would come that I hadn't seen in 2 or 3 weeks, and I saw at that event because they would remind me, I haven't been to Charlie Parker's for a while. Yeah. Those things are nice, but that's not the reason to be a member of the chamber. The reason to be a member of the chamber is what the chamber does for you, even when you're not looking.
Couldn't agree more.
I'm in all kinds of meetings. I mentioned at the gala, since I've started this job at the time of the gala, I've been asked to be on 16 different boards, steering groups, or committees. Now it's 18.
Wow!
So in the last month, I've been added to 2 others. Yeah. And it's important that I go to those because the chamber needs to have a seat at the table at all those things to make sure that the business interests are discussed. And you can't assume that they are. I was at a meeting where you would have thought a lot of business leaders were around, and they were talking about one particular issue, and I had to stop them. I said, "Hey, we need to look at the economic impact this might have."
Oh yeah.
And they go, "Oh yeah, you're right."
Yeah.
And so my being there is important. Not that I have all the answers, but I've been in business a long time. I understand a little bit about government, so I can represent, I think, the business. If they talk about a specific item, about banning a certain chemical, I'm going to have to call you to find that out.
Yeah,
but I don't know everything about your business, but I understand the core principles of business.
And you guys are responsible for leadership Springfield, is that correct?
Awesome program.
Because that is a great.
Yeah, not to toot my own horn, but we had our largest ever class last year.
Yeah, I saw that.
43.
43. 42 ended up completing it.
When I read that newsletter that that you guys send out, and I mean, just you talk about a cross section of people that really represent the community. I mean, every company that you recognize, a large company, was represented.
That's the program we were talking the other day about having Matt apply for this fall.
It would be great if he did that. It's just a wonderful thing. It's 14 weeks long. I had been involved in it in previous years. I would help organize the state government program.
Okay.
Because 1 week they go to the Capitol, and I would arrange to have members of the General Assembly, and I always tried to get somebody from the executive branch to also talk about what they do every day, but just to give them some exposure about state government, because it's going to be important. They're going to be the leaders of the company, and so they need to know how to work with their local officials, and the importance of keeping them educated.
Yeah, that's great.
We chuckled when we started about my previous role being with the chamber, but one of the reasons I reached out to Mike as soon as I announced I was leaving there to come join the Peerless team was because of some of the things you've mentioned in Mike's background as a small business owner. He knows the day-to-day struggles of what it's like to run a business, the challenges, the employee issues, the HR challenges, all those various things.
And the rewards.
Right.
But he also understands the government side because of your role as a state rep. And so can you just share a little bit about kind of your history and your story in the restaurant business, how you ended up here in the Springfield area and so on, if you don't mind?
I'd be happy to. I grew up in Divernon, Illinois, just a small town. And I got to tell this quick story about government. When I was 16 years old, 16 and 17, I delivered mail for Department of General Services. It's now known as CMS. And I would deliver to all the agencies in the state. So I know all the tunnels really well. They connect you to the archives building. But every day that the General Assembly was in, I would sneak in and take a little break and watch them from the balcony. And Chris and Brad, and I might get a little emotional every now and then today, but don't worry about it. That's just me. I'm sorry. That's me. But I would look down on those men and women and say, boy, wouldn't it be nice to be special like them? Sure. At that point in time in my age, I thought, that was your destiny. You had to be born to be able to be down there. And I thought there was no way a kid from Divernon with my background, my mom and dad were both hardworking people. I mean, my dad fixed radiators for 42 years and didn't enjoy one day of it, but he did it because he needed to do it to provide a living for us. And so anyway, then I went to the Army, and then I went to Eastern Illinois University. And my senior year at Eastern, by the way, I got married my sophomore year. So I was married. I was a little bit older student because of the Army. But my senior year, I'm in it, and I'm working on campaigns. State Senator Max Coffey, I actually ran his campaign in 78 while I was a student. And but he said, what are you going to do when you graduate? I said, I don't know. He goes, well, you want to go work on staff? I said, no, I don't want to be writing legislation. You know, I said, I love campaigns and I love constituent service. And he says, well, why don't you run my office for me part-time, go to school, and let's open up a restaurant. And so we opened up Taco Tiempo because neither one of us had been in the restaurant business, and so that's what you do while you're going to college.
Do something you've never done.
But my wife worked at McDonald's when she was 16, and she had the only experience in the restaurant business.
So where was this restaurant?
Charleston, Illinois.
Okay.
And so we were so bright. You know, Charleston's known for this university, so we made sure this was as far away from the university as possible.
What really wise choice.
Yes. It was down by the school. Oh, they had a closed campus, so they couldn't even come there. But so we opened up Taco Tiempo in 1979, and so we were 50-50 partners, and that was another lesson. I will be 51 or nothing the rest of my life.
Yes.
But it was going well. You know, we had a lot of bumps in the road, but we were getting along pretty good. And then Max got married to a young lady, and she decided she was my partner, and I didn't like that, so I offered to buy Max out. And he bought me out instead, and which was fine. Max and I have a good relationship today, and everything's fine there. So now I'm sitting here. I need a job. You know, I have a wife, and you know, so my buddy, who was my junior high basketball coach and my high school football coach, calls me up and says, "Hey, I just bought a restaurant, and we're upside down. Will you come down and run it for me?" And I said, sure. So I went down to Wood River, Illinois, down by the Alton, and I ran Brown's Chicken. I ran that for 3 years, from 1980 to 83. And I decided I liked the restaurant business, and but I wanted to grow a little bit, and he wasn't going to go. At one time, he thought he was going to go to the St. Louis area. Then he decided not to. He was fine with 2 stores, and I wanted something more than just being a manager. So I ended up going to work for Brown's Corporation.
Okay.
And which brought me back literally to this building that we're in today.
Gotcha, yeah.
Because the first stop I made in Springfield was to this building.
Yeah. And, you know, everybody says, oh, yeah, you're in the old Brown's Chicken building.
Yeah, and so at the time there was 4 Brown's Chickens. And so I was brought back to Springfield. They called me up and they said, hey, can you meet us at the Springfield airport? You think you can figure out where that at? I said, you guys know I grew up in Springfield area. Yeah. And they go, no, hey, would you mind working there for 6 months?
Sure.
So I came here in March of 83 for 6 months.
Okay.
And I haven't left.
Yeah, well, that's
and
awesome.
So I ran Brown's Chicken for a while. And my first actually immediate boss at Brown's was a lady by the name of Sue Shepard. And she left after about 4 months and went to work for Domino's Pizza. So I got her job. I got promoted where I had not only the Springfield market, I had all of downstate Illinois. And as my mother once introduced me one time to a group that I was speaking to, her ladies group, she said, and he has all of Iowa. We had one store in Iowa.
Hey, that's all of Iowa.
That's all of Iowa. Yeah.
We had one store in Davenport, and I had it, and so I had all of Iowa.
That's awesome.
But anyway, so I did that for a couple years, and then Sue called me up one day and wanted to know when I was going to come to Chicago next, because she knew I came up to Chicago once a month, because that's where Brown's was headquartered, right in Oak Brook, actually. So I told her I was coming up, next week, and she says, "Hey, let's go to dinner." And so I go to dinner with her, and we're having a conversation very similar to what you guys are having with me. Her boss was there. I didn't think nothing of it.
Sure.
And about 45 minutes into it, he says, "Hey, we want you to come to work for us." I didn't even know it was a job interview.
Right.
It was the strangest job interview I've ever had in my life. He was just asking me about things. And so keep in mind, at the time, my wife was about 7 months pregnant, and we were just completing our first house we ever owned together. We were building it. So I went downstairs at Carson's Ribs. I went downstairs and made a call, because on the payphone back then. This would have been 1983, I guess, or 85. And I said, "Hey, I just got offered a job." And my wife, being the sensible one, she says, "Well, how much does it pay?" And I said, well, I don't know.
have any idea.
And I said, but I really think I want to take it.
I really think I'm super excited about it.
How much does it pay? Keep in mind, we're about ready to have our first child and build our first house. Yeah. And I went upstairs and took a job that I didn't know how much it paid. And
that is a riot.
The strange, I kind of had an idea, though, because I was going to do what Sue did, but Sue would have the northern area and I'd have the southern area for Domino's Pizza. And of this region. And so I would have Central Illinois and Central and Northern Indiana. And so I took the job. And guys, I can tell you this. I found out how much I got paid when I got my first check.
Yeah.
My wife. And fortunately, I got a raise.
Yeah, good.
And then when I went to my first meeting, I didn't even know. This is how, naive I was. I didn't even know I was on the bonus program. They walked around and gave us an envelope, and I watched some other guys open it, and I opened it, and it was a bonus check.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so I was in the high cotton. So I did that, and that was a great job. It really was. I had began with 24 Domino's pizzas, and my geographic area shrunk by about a third. But I ended up with 64 stores. Wow. That's how much we were growing.
That's nice. You didn't have to travel as much, though.
Well, I still had Auburn, Indiana, which is right at the Indiana, Ohio, Michigan border.
Okay.
I could almost touch all three of them. That was my farthest store, but I lost a lot west. I didn't have to go as far west. I used to have to go over to Galesburg in that area, and Peoria became my farthest away. And so it condensed a little bit there. Sure. It was great. So I had 64 stores, but I didn't have no one work for me. They were all franchise stores. So I was the corporate guy.
Okay.
And so I would have to visit them at least once a month. So there's a lot. I spent a lot of time on the road.
Sure.
But it was a great job. And what I liked about it, it wasn't the same. Brad, you might have had one particular problem, and then I would go to Chris's store, and he had a different problem. So I could work with you on different things. And so it was just a lot of fun each day. The only problem was it was a lot of traveling.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
2 weeks a month I was in Indiana. And my kids, once they started playing sports, I didn't want to do that. The day I decided I needed to change was when my son saw me grab my suitcase, and he started crying.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was gone for a week every time. I do 2 weeks a month. I would go to Indiana for a week, come back and work Illinois where I could spend the night at home, and then I'd go back to Indiana for another week. And that was it. And so I decided I didn't want to be gone that much, and so I took an opportunity to work locally, and one thing led to another, and I finally got back into ownership when I bought Charlie Parker's, and
that's awesome.
What year did you buy Charlie Parker's?
Charlie Parker's would have been 2008.
Okay.
Yeah. And
did you make any changes when you bought it? Or
no, I really didn't. I'm a believer when I come into an operation, and I did the same thing at the chamber, by the way. I told him, I said, I'm not going to make any changes for 6 months.
Yeah.
And I kind of had the same philosophy at Charlie Parker's. I never made any substantial changes.
Okay. Yeah.
It was always a breakfast and lunch. I changed the menu. I put some items on. I tweaked this and that. I offered a senior menu where they never had that before, and different things like that. But for the most part, if you looked at it from 20,000 feet, you would have thought it was the same. You had to get down in the weeds to see the difference.
So
my big difference was in the operations.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Founder, and I don't want to equate myself to the McDonald brothers in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But if you remember that great movie, The Founders, they went out to a park before they built their first store and walked through the operation.
Right. I remember that.
Well, when I took over Charlie Parker's, the kitchen was set up in such a way they were doing probably 100% of what they could do.
Sure.
But it wasn't what we needed to do.
Gotcha.
Okay, to be profitable.
Sure.
And so it took me 6 months to revamp, to decrease the number of steps, to add a piece of equipment here that could fit. That was the biggest problem. I knew what they needed, but I just couldn't fit it in there because I had a defined space. So it took me about 6 months before I'd even marketed because I didn't want any more business because we were struggling handling what we had. And then if I had my chart in here of sales, you could see, well, we were kind of flat the first 6 months, did what they did before, and then we skyrocketed. And then we took off and we never looked back.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So I watch Food Network a lot, and you guys were on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Was that part of your tenure?
No, that was like 9 months before I took over.
Okay, gotcha. How did that happen,
Dick Levi's son,
No, it wasn't Dick Levi's son. It was, well, one of the from Levi, Ray, and Shop. It was Ray's.
Okay,
okay. Ray's son was a fraternity brother of the guy who
Guy
does
Fieri. Oh,
Guy
obviously.
Fieri.
What a small world.
And so he told him about the place, and so he came. And well, I was planning on going that day as a customer.
Oh, really? Okay.
I was working for a mutual friend of all of ours, Jeff Stauffer.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot about that.
I was running Mellow Cream Donuts for him, and so I called a college buddy of mine and said, "Hey, let's go there, and so we can be on diners, drive-ins, and dives." Yeah. And so we were going to go. Well, Guy Fieri had to postpone it a day.
Okay.
And so the next day I had meetings.
Oh, shoot.
And so I said, that's okay, no biggie.
Yeah.
And I had no idea I would be buying it in about 9 months.
Yeah,
And so,
I love that guy. Yeah. Well,
and so I had Charlie Parker's and had that for 9 years and sold it to my assistant manager. I'm really proud of that. I was able to provide an exit strategy for me, but also a growth opportunity for him. And when I go out and talk to different groups, and I talk about long-term thinking as opposed to short-term. I hate anything short-term. Mm-hmm. I tell people you makes you feel good today. Then that's fine for today.
Right.
I want to do things that make you feel good for your life.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds a little corny or whatever, but if you work that way, and so when I left Charlie Parker's, I could have left that day. I didn't even have to sell it. Be honest with you, my life was a lot better than it was 9 years. We did really good.
That's awesome.
But by selling it to my assistant manager for probably less than what I could have put it on the open market. I felt good because I've changed somebody else's life.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, it is.
That's once again, that's why I'm still working at age 69. Yeah. I like trying to make a difference.
Sure.
And if I can come here and help somebody in business, because I know how rewarding it can be, and I also know how challenging it can be. If I can do that, man, that's a day well spent.
Amen.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. I thought about when you said you were in a job interview and didn't even know it.
Yeah,
I was in a job interview and I didn't even know it. When Brad called me back in the summer of 21 to say, "Hey, you want to consider coming to work for Peerless?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'll think about it." And he said, "You finally passed the 18-year interview that you've been in."
Yeah.
So,
That's how long we knew each other.
I thought about when you said that.
Those are the best kind, because I felt really good that. That day when Don Sinclair was his name. I had never met Don before, but Sue Shepard told him about me.
Yeah.
And he didn't ask me one interview question. He just talked to me about life.
Yeah.
And he offered me a job just because he knew he felt comfortable that he could work with me. He didn't know what my feelings was on how my management style or anything like that. He just knew it's somebody you could work with, and that's what it's about.
Yeah, it is absolutely
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you can still tell them about your job description that you got. If I ever told you that.
Him, Mike,
so I said, he goes, we agreed on the terms of the deal and all this stuff, and when he was going to start, and he goes, "Oh, and by the way, Janelle, his wife, said, do you have a job description? What are you going to do?" And so he called me, and I said, "Listen, you don't have one. Just look around all the corners, fix all the stuff that I screwed up, and then I've got this one kid, Matt Wike, my son, and I am about worn out trying to raise him and make him a productive individual. So if you could just pick up that too, those are the three things I'm going to hold you accountable for, but I will not bring it up in your review."
Well, I got to disagree with you there because I've met Matt on more than one occasion, and you've done a pretty good job with that.
I give him a hard time.
He's a great young man, and I'm sure he gives you some angst every now and then. I'm really proud of my two kids, but I can't say that I've never shook my head at it.
But he's helped a lot. Him and Stephen Thomas and some other operations.
I would think it would be tough. We had a little bit of experience like that when I decided to get in politics. My son is my neighbor, by the way. We built a house. The second house we built, the first house I was told you about where he was pregnant. Yeah. The second house we built across the street from him.
That's cool.
We built a house in 2016, so he's our neighbor, and him and his wife and 3 boys. So he
he jumped in and started helping me on campaign. He doesn't like politics. He's really, he has no interest in ever doing that. But he, fortunately for me, he likes his dad, and so he learned how to do it. And it was a great, rewarding experience that we went through this. I mean, we did crazy things like you're doing today. Yeah. We had lights in the basement. We had a video camera, and we did our own ads. And
That's cool.
You know, my wife walked down one day and shook her head and walked back up. Couldn't believe it. Of course, that was the day that I announced that I wasn't going to take part in the state pension program. I probably shouldn't have said that out loud because she still makes her mad when she hears that.
I bet it does.
So it was a lot of fun working with him on
that's
that.
Neat. That's cool.
You know, speaking of that, what do you miss most about your role as a state rep?
You know, I really like the opportunity to be involved every day. You know, I told you, you know, the reason I'm here at the chamber is I try to help the business. That was my goal as a state rep. I like the process.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that there was a bill that was introduced that was way over here on my left. And I would have loved for it to be way over here on the right. And I'm not using left and right because of liberal or conservative. I'm just using it as directional. And if I could have just stood up on a soapbox and screamed and hollered about it, it wouldn't have moved.
Yeah.
Right.
But if I was willing to get in there, talk to him, and work, I might have moved it only a fourth of the way of where it should have been.
Yeah.
But still, that was a day.
Making progress.
I remember us having this very conversation.
Yeah, you know,
a couple of years ago. You said the process is what's so great. And if you cooperate with one another and work together, you can get things to move closer to the place that you like them to be, versus standing up on the soapbox and screaming and hollering and yelling at everybody about what's wrong with it. And there's a lot to be said about that, not just in politics.
Well,
by the way,
I asked people, and I used to say this to the members of my caucus. I said, "Do you want to make a statement or you want to make a difference?"
Yes.
I'm here to make a difference. And every now and then you need to make a statement. People need to be called out on what they do, but you need to do it in such a way that you can continue to work with them. And that's what bothers me today, not only in Springfield, but across the country. We have become so divisive. You know, and
so true.
we got to be able to understand somebody has a different attitude than you. That doesn't make them wrong. You know,
or a bad person.
No,
right?
It definitely doesn't do that. I can honestly say, I can count the number of times that when I went to press the button, yes or no, I had 100% feeling that I was right. Right. Most of the time when I went to press that button, it was like 60-40, 70-30. Like I could see the other side. I could see it and I could feel it and I could understand them. You know, and there's some issues there that if you just listen to somebody, you could get where they're coming from. And I will be critical of the other side as much as us. Just because they have this supermajority in seats, they don't have this supermajority ideas.
Right.
You know, and sometimes they do. They have to understand the other side has some ideas that have merit to them, and they need to listen to. And the good ones do.
Yeah.
You know, I worked a lot with Democrats, and my name's on some legislation that if you looked at it, you'd say, why was Murphy a co-sponsor of that? The reason I was a co-sponsor is we moved it.
Yeah.
Right.
And if without my participation, it wouldn't have been moved. And being a co-sponsor is important because they like to be able to say things were bipartisan.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I get the optics of it, but I will put my name on something to make it better.
Yeah.
And I caught, you know, my exit interview, my favorite one was with NPR when I left. You know, people reached out for whatever reason. You know, I don't know why anybody would want to interview. I don't know why you guys want me here today. But NPR asked me.
We're trying to figure out if the chamber was left in good stead. You know.
Yeah. Brad's still checking up
I'm
on
still
me.
table to figure all that out.
Apparently, my interview still continues.
I was going to say, is he still on probation?
No, not anymore.
But this interview I did with NPR, during it came out that I like being called a rhino, and a rhino is called a Republican in name only. And that's what normal ultra-conservative or conservative Republicans call somebody in their party who they feel like they don't have the proper beliefs.
Oh, okay.
And so I enjoyed it when I was called the rhino because I knew I was making a difference.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I knew I was doing something.
Yep.
You know, I could have easily just sat on the sidelines and pointed fingers and shouted and held the conservative values there and been reelected forever.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, I took a vote that
word got out that they were going to primary me. Some of my supporters were going to primary on me. So I had a conversation with them.
Sure.
And I reminded them of our first conversation when they asked for 3 things. And the thing that they were upset that I voted for had 10 business initiatives on there. 3 of them were those 3 things that they asked for.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
So I told them, I said, don't complain about how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
If you want to eat the sausage, I will get it for you.
Yeah.
But don't complain. I said,
well
and then
said.
the meeting ended kind of like, I hope you run somebody against me because I'm going to kick their.
Yep, I like it.
You know what?
I like
yeah,
her attitude.
And so, so they called me up, and I walked out. I didn't give them an opportunity to talk to me.
Yeah.
And they called me up. I had many conversations with a lot of people apologizing. And I said, well, it just upsets me. You guys want something? We get it. Now you're complaining what we had to do to get it?
Right, exactly.
If you don't want it, don't ask for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but that's what we needed to do. And that bill is hanging up in my office.
Wow.
Those 10 business items. And because we had to put 10 votes on the budget and 20 votes on the capital bill. And that's what upset the people because the capital bill had a 19-cent gas tax increase. But I would argue that was good for Springfield. All you got to do is drive around and look at all the construction going on in Springfield, and that's being paid for by the capital bill. We came out ahead.
Yeah, gotcha.
Now, somebody down in Staunton might have a complaint, but no one in Springfield has a complaint about the capital bill. And I will argue that forever. But anyway, so I carried those 10 business items with me for 3 years in my pocket. So just to remind me to do the right thing all the time, because what I did was the right thing. And so right before I left, I had another one printed out, and I went and got the other 9 people who voted for the budget and their signatures on it, and it's framed in my office.
Oh, that's good.
Just to remind me that why I was there, I tried to do the right. I never once voted worrying about if this was going to cost me my next election.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
For sure, because that's not what a lot of folks are thinking.
Well,
they're thinking about what is this going to do to my next election.
I mentioned the pension earlier. I don't think there should be a pension for anybody in the General Assembly because I don't think it should be a career position.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because then all of a sudden, when you start getting pensions and other things, you start worrying about reelection.
Yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to doing the right thing. If I would have got beat, life goes on. And I knew I was in a little different situation than a lot of people. The money that I got paid there was nice, but it wasn't life changing.
Right.
I was at the position where I could have retired, but I don't want to retire. On my last vacation over Thanksgiving, we went down a cruise, and one of the books I read was Dick Van Dyke's book, Just Keep Moving, I think it's called, or Keep Moving, and he's 96 now.
Is that right?
And he works out every day.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
His goal is to lift his age, so he tries to press 96 pounds.
I love it. That's good.
He's in charge of the local theater group at 96.
Wow.
And so I want to keep moving.
Yeah.
I want to keep. I don't want to stay at home and watch TV. I want to keep doing something.
We talk a lot about that too.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I told you I wrote down 7 things I wanted to do or could have done and made me happy.
Yeah.
I also skipped about 10 lines, and at the bottom of the page I wrote "Welcome to Walmart" to remind myself I was going to do something. And if it was being a Walmart greeter, it would have been a Walmart greeter.
Yeah. Right.
I was going to do something.
That's awesome.
And so, I don't know how long that's going to last.
Yeah.
But as long as I can feel like I'm contributing and feel good,
Sure.
I'm blessed. My health is in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
And so I like going to work.
That's great. And we have a guy working for us in our marketing department, calls on insurance agents. He's probably been here a little over 20 years, but what's Larry, 80?
80, just turned
80.
Yeah.
But I mean, he looks 15, 20 years younger than that.
And goes every day.
He's
Calls
sharp.
on insurance agents all day, every day.
All day, every day. He hustles, and or consequently, I see folks that retire, and they've been out of the job world for 25 years, and they're just not as on top of things as a guy like Larry is.
In my situation, my wife's been retired for 6 years now. She was a school teacher. We got 3 grandsons across the street. My daughter moved back here in 2020.
Sure.
Chris knows where she lives, out by him, and she's got 5-year-old twins and a 1-year-old boy. We have 6 grandkids right here.
That's awesome.
We're not going to go to Florida for 3 months, 6 months. And,
exactly.
you know, I get 4.5 weeks vacation time for the chamber. That's plenty of time for me. I mean, I do some fun stuff. We got our first European trip planned for next year. And I do a bike ride across Iowa every year. And I'm
cool.
planning on doing my final one this year because I want to do some other rides. I got the next 5 years rides planned out.
Good for
Brad.
you.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
I'm going to do the Natchez Trace in 24, going from Natchez, Mississippi to Nashville.
Oh, really?
444 miles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How many on average, depending on weather, how many miles a day would you ride?
Training or on that ride?
No, on that ride.
On the Natchez, I can tell you exactly what we're going to do.
Okay.
The first 5 days, we do 70 miles each day. Day 6, we're going to do 50. And then day 7, we do 44. The reason we do less at the end, once you get closer to Nashville, you get in the hills.
Okay, yeah.
Gotcha.
And when I say we, a buddy of mine's going to do it with me, and we're going to have another guy who will pick us up every day and take us to our hotel.
Oh, that's
This
neat.
is why
That's
Iowa's
awesome.
going to be my last year this year because I sleep in a tent.
Okay.
And I have decided that those days
just
are
don't have-
numbered.
You're done with that.
All my rides, I got the Natchez, I got one in Georgia I want to do, one up in La Crosse, and one down in New Orleans. That's the
great.
next 5 years. And they're all will be hotel rides. And
that's
so I will ride. We ride 60 to 70 miles is what you typically
That's
do on a.
significant. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Significant.
What do you do training wise? Are you asked about training versus the
Training. I do a
typical
lot
day.
of 23-mile rides because that's how long the Sangamon Valley Trail is.
Oh, okay.
And so I try to go before work, but you know the chamber they open at 8 o'clock.
Right. You got,
That's ridiculous.
Well, you should come to work here. I mean, hey, we'll get you up even earlier.
Yeah.
But so I try to get out there after work, and if I can, you know, and then on weekends I try to do a minimum of 50 miles each day.
Yeah, good
you
for
know,
you. That's
that's
great.
awesome.
And then if my goal is to have 12 to 1,500 miles before I go to Iowa.
Okay, very good.
Because then if you do that, this will be my 12th time doing Iowa, so I understand a little bit.
Sure.
If I always get 12 to 1,500 miles in, I never worry.
Yeah.
No matter what the day is, you know, some days are harder than others, but I get through them okay.
that's fine.
Yeah.
But one year I went over there with about 600 miles under my belt, and it was a struggle, and it wasn't as much fun. You can't enjoy it.
No.
So I want to get the miles in so I can enjoy the ride.
Well, that's great.
Good for you.
That's
You've been doing that for a long time.
Yeah, I started riding 15 years ago.
Okay.
And so
Good for you.
And it really helped. When I started riding, I was about 270 pounds, and
Were you really?
Yeah, it got me down to 200 pounds, and I battled with that. This year, I hope to get one of my New Year's resolutions. I can tell you, I want to spend more days under 200 than over 200.
good for you.
And so I'm getting close.
Yeah.
I'm about under the 200 mark, and I got to get there. And
Good
so,
for you.
Yeah, I think I saw 200 like
It's been a while ago for me too.
40 years ago, and
Yeah.
haven't even sniffed it.
I always get, in the last few years, I always get really close to 200. A couple times I'm under it, but just for a week or two, I do Iowa, and then when I get back, I go back. And so
I love it.
And I have found out one problem about getting older. It's harder to get rid of that weight the older you get.
Oh boy, I know. I know.
Yeah,
I keep trying to convince myself muscle weighs more. But I don't think that's necessarily
you're
true.
gaining
Yeah,
weight?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have that. I don't have
That's
that.
good.
Yeah,
I like
no,
it.
I know. It's fabricated in my own mind.
It makes you feel better about it. So.
I have introduced a couple new things into my off-season training this time. That I'm jumping boxes and doing some different things to try to help the core. Because man, that core is just when the older you get, the worse that core is.
I know the feeling.
The harder it
Well, you look
becomes.
great.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
Well, hey, we could sit here all day with you
Yeah.
and listen to stories and tell stories.
No problem.
What as we wrap it up, what initiative or two are you guys working on at the chamber that you feel really strongly, feel really good about as representing folks like us in the business community?
Well, the number one thing that I'm proudest is our efforts on our young professional group.
Yeah.
We have a group that's just started, just had their first event called Rise. It's going to be for 20s and 30s, but if you're in your 40s and still feel young, you're welcome there. They don't ID you.
Yeah.
And Chris, and Brad, I talked earlier about long term.
Yes.
And this is part of my long-term thinking. I want to make sure Springfield's in good shape for the next 20, 30, 40 years and with leadership. And there's a lot of great, leadership. Springfield's tremendous, but that helps 40 people a year, and so I wanted a group that might be able to get some of these leadership Springfield grads and work. And so when I sat down with the couple individuals I picked to start this off, I told them I have 3 objectives. I want a third of your time to be spent on networking and getting to know your peers, because that will be so more valuable than you can ever realize. A third of your time spent on professional development. You just got to constantly improving. Sure. And then a third of your time given community service, because I want people to feel what I do about Springfield.
Sure.
I love Springfield.
Yep.
I mean, and I want to give back to Springfield. Springfield's been tremendous to me, but I would be very selfish if I didn't do anything to give back to Springfield after the opportunities they've given me. Yeah, I grew up in Divernon, a small town. Like I say, 2 working parents. I had no idea my life would be like it is today. Yeah. None. Yeah. I never pictured that. Yeah. And the reason is the people of Springfield.
Sure.
Yeah. Yep. I mean.
Yeah. And, I would say, coming from Decatur, that and now having lived here for almost 7 years, but doing business here for probably 20, is that there is a sense of community in Springfield. And a lot of the people come back to Springfield to work, whereas in Decatur, we have ADM and some of the bigger corporations like that, but those are people transplanted to Decatur. So you don't have that, that same feeling here, because there's a lot of pride the people that grew up here. Like, I'm on the Springfield Sports Hall of Fame, and those folks know, on that board, they know everything from 1970. There's just a feeling of community here in Springfield because of guys like you. And I think the one other thing is, I'd say that young CEO group that we're a part of.
Sagma CEO.
Oh, they're great. We're starting those kids out with that early. Then you roll them into the professional deal, like what you're talking about. I think it's tremendous.
I had an honor to speak to them the other day. Matter of fact, I felt really great. Matter of fact, one of the guys who worked the desk at LA Fitness where I work, he's in Sangamon CEO. And the other day when I was leaving, he asked me some questions about his project, and it made me feel it just made my day.
This whole thing of building and pouring resources and time and energy into the next generation of leaders is so critical for the future of Springfield and every community. And I don't know. To me, I always say shame on those who don't want to do it, but want to hold on to things so tightly, because what we do is we leave a community void of the next generation of leaders. And Leadership Springfield, like you said, was great for that. I was reading about your RISE program that you guys just started. I think it's fantastic. But it is extremely important for the future of every community to have folks who are committed to investing in the next generation. Yeah, and so many people won't do it.
No, you got to. The thing that I look back at Charlie Parker's, and what I'm most proud of, is my workers who we provided an opportunity. They were able to do things, and now they've moved on to other things. And people say, why are you happy somebody left? Because they bettered themselves. Yeah. I used to say, I know there's life outside of Charlie Parker's. Let me help you find it. Yeah. And I would tell somebody, if you come here and work hard, you will not have a better advocate for you on leaving Charlie Parker's than me. I will do everything I can to get you the opportunity you want. I'm so proud of the young ladies who came and worked for me while they were going through nursing school. Some of them are now supervisors and in management in our hospitals in Springfield. Right. And could they have done it without Charlie Parker's? Probably. Yeah. But we worked around their schedules. They made good tips. They made good money. Yeah. And so, gosh, that makes me feel good. Yeah. When they left, was there a void? Yeah, because they were great servers. Right. Yeah. But I was happy that they left because I wanted them to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. When you treat people the right way and provide them with the right opportunities, it sure makes it easier to sleep at night when your head hits the pillow. That's for sure.
That's the only thing I want to do is when I give speeches, all I talk about is opportunities. Sure. When I was in the General Assembly, I would debate against some programs that didn't offer opportunities. If it's just a program to better somebody's life that day, that didn't excite me. Sure. But if you can better that life that day and also give them an opportunity to better the rest of their life, that's a program I was willing to put my support behind. And so, RISE is one of them. I enjoy the aspect of advocacy.
Yeah.
I get to still talk to some of my buddies at the State House. But to be honest with you, as you well know, most of my advocacy is done at the city and the county level.
Absolutely.
It's a lot. It's a lot more
For
done.
sure.
Because we have other groups who advocate on the state level for us. But I still. I got a call the other day from Mark Densler at Illinois Manufacturers wanting me to make
he's
a couple.
good one.
Oh, he couldn't be. There's no one better. Call me up and say, hey, can you make a couple calls for me to a couple of legislators on this? And so I enjoy that aspect of it. So as we're in the middle of session now, that I'm keeping my eye on some bills, see where they're going to move. One of our challenges, and I probably need to pick your brain a little bit more on this, but is our seminars. We've noticed a drop in participation in seminars, and I asked a group the other day. I participate in the large chamber call that you did, and these are, Brad, for you to know, these are larger chambers in the country. Even though Springfield's not a large city, our chamber is
pretty good size.
Yeah, we're the second largest in the state of Illinois.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
And so I'm on with people like from Nashville and Atlanta and different things. And so I asked them, I said, what are you guys doing to have successful seminars? And they all shook their heads. They said, man, it's been a struggle since COVID.
I think COVID is a big part of that. And folks have gotten so used to working from home or remote work and behind a computer
it's just
rather than going to something.
And what bothers me, we just literally talked about this morning at our staff meeting. Even that we can't just give up on it because we need to provide those type of training, those type of opportunities for people to learn on what these seminars provided. It's a good mission. We just got to figure out how to make the mission better for our customers and our customers being the members.
Yeah, that's great.
Good. Cool. Good stuff. Well, thanks for coming in. Sure is fun to
you
catch
know,
up, and
thank
we
you,
appreciate
Mike.
you doing this with us, and most of all for the work you're doing with the chamber. I mean, I know it because I was there for years, and the day we spoke after I said, hey, I'm leaving to go join the Peerless team, I said, I think that is the right guy
clearly,
for that role.
We are in great hands with you.
Well,
so
I appreciate that, and I can't leave without thanking you, Brad, because you can expand, you can do wherever you want. I know you do work all over the state of Illinois. The fact that you chose Springfield to make part of your organization makes me feel really good.
Well, thank you.
And we're blessed to have people like you and Dick Levi and other people who make this their home.
Well, thank you. I love it here. Yeah,
I know you don't have to come to Springfield.
Right.
You could do this work a lot of different places, and you chose to do it in Springfield, so I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike. Good seeing you.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.